My Aunt Sue is going to tell us the story that she knows of Ardith Cribbs, who's a woman she worked with through prison ministry.
Yes, that I mentored.
You mentored.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought I was going to get somebody who'd written some bad checks and just in for a short time. And here comes my paperwork. And it's a woman who's in for 25 to life. And so I wondered when I met her, I wonder if she'll tell me like why she's in here and everything. I wonder if she'll want to talk about it. The first day I went to meet her, actually, she was very anxious to tell me, because if I'm going to be judgmental, this isn't going to work. If you're going to judge me for this, just go home now, you know. So she sat me down and basically told me her story and everything. And we started a relationship, you know, where I was coming every week to spend time with her. At one point I thought, I wonder how truthful she's being about her story. I wonder if everything she's told me is true. So I Googled Ardith Cribbs, and up immediately comes an article that was titled "The Strange Case of Ardith Cribbs." And so I read it, and sure enough, everything she'd already told me was accurate. And her crime was, she committed her crime right around the time that O.J. Simpson was in trouble. And so his news was all over every page of the newspaper and everything, but there was a substantial amount of newspaper articles and everything that told about what she did and everything.
I Googled her and she comes up right away.
Yeah.
And what I saw was first-degree murder. She poisoned and shot her husband, is that right?
She shot him execution style with a .357 Magnum. Okay, here's her little story.
Okay.
She got married fairly young to a guy who was a disaster, divorced, married someone else, solid guy. They planned to have a family, and she found out she wasn't able to have children. His parents said they would never accept an adopted child as their grandchild. They divorced, and she just took a little, whatever money she had, and didn't know what she was going to do with her life, how she was going to support herself. She got on a plane and she went to Nevada, told the cab driver she's there to start a new life, and he drove her to the Mustang Ranch, which is a brothel, and she started being a prostitute there.
At what age was that?
And you know, she had to be early 20s.
Okay, so she started as a prostitute late.
Yeah, she wasn't a teenager. She'd already been
I don't know
twice.
what my concept of starting prostitution would be. I always picture some kid who's thrust into it at a very young age, but I guess 20 would be about right.
Early 20s, yes. So she was working there.
Just for the record, you can start prostituting anytime you like.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be 20.
While she was working there, there was one guy that became like a boyfriend, or at least she thought he was a boyfriend. She knew he had a lot of money, and she thought he had something to do with the jewelry business, and he might have had something to do with the jewelry business, but he had mob ties too. And so by the time she found that out and things weren't going well and she wanted out of that relationship, he wouldn't let her go. And she said that his friends held her against her will and raped her and burned her. She had burns on her arms and everything. And so she was able to get away from him with a couple $100, just enough for a plane fare to fly up to Washington, where her cousins were, and get away. She was already quite a mess. Her grandfather had sexually abused her. She had a lot of emotional abuse and sexual abuse growing up. And now she had this. She flew up to Washington and was staying with cousins, and she walked out on the front porch one morning, and the family cat was dead. She looks down the street, and there's a car with the ex-boyfriend's guys sitting down there. They wanted her to know they were following her.
Okay.
She had a lot of PTSD and everything, and so she decided to fly back home to San Pedro, California, where she grew up, where her parents were, and go back home. And so she went home and she got a job with the Fish and Game Department, and she met a man there that she fell for, and he fell for her, but she still had a lot of a lot of problems. She described him to be the world's best husband. She described him to like have a bubble bath filled when she came home from work, and just to be a very kind, wonderful husband. But she had a lot of hang-ups sexually because of everything she'd been through. She had seen counseling about her sexual problems, and the counselor, one of the things they advised her on was to try tying him to the bedpost so that she didn't
called a
feel
provocative technique, you know,
so that she didn't feel overpowered by him, so that she would feel like she had control and that he couldn't overpower her. So she, on one of those occasions, had him tied to the bedpost naked, and she says that he said something that triggered something in her. She claimed all through the time I knew her, she claimed that she could not remember what he said. It must have been something about her past, but she kept a loaded .357 in the nightstand drawer, and she got it out and shot him execution style, I think like 18 times.
Wow.
She went in and took a handful of pills, and her intention was to
Kill herself
also. So the next morning, the neighbor, who was a friend, came over to visit or something. She came over. Nobody answered the door. She looked in and didn't seem quite right in there, so she walked in. She found Ardith on the bathroom floor, passed out, not dead, and Gordon in the bed, naked, shot up. And she called an ambulance, and they got her to the hospital. They, of course, saved her and then transferred her straight to jail and then prison. And there she sat for 25 to life. So she was in the mental ward most of the time that I visited her. And it was very, very interesting, you know, visiting with her and getting to know her. And I mean, my heart broke for her because she had a crappy family, you know, and I feel so blessed. And it just makes you think by the grace of God, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there, but for the grace of God. I mean, where would you be had you been abused by your grandfather and then burned and raped? And
one of the things I learned in visiting her was that not everybody in that prison is like hardcore street people. I mean, like she looked like Martha Stewart, and there's a lot of people sitting in prison who weren't, you know, long time criminals, but somebody who just had a lapse of judgment and hit somebody over the head with a baseball bat.
Right.
Now they're, you know.
But you know, so much of it is set up in what's not said. When a child doesn't have a strong positive influence and someone helping them navigate their inner life, boy, they can get tangled up in all sorts of misguided thinking and emotion. And
so after just a few months of visiting her, they had this program that they have once a year that was like an appreciation for the volunteers that come and meet with people. And there had been a lot of rolling blackouts going on in California. And one day I thought, like, I wonder if there's ever a blackout at the prison. Oh, well, I guess they know what to do. But anyway, we're sitting there, and sure enough, the warden went to the microphone and said, we're going to have a rolling blackout here in a minute. I want everybody to take a seat. Don't anybody get out of your seat. Don't make me regret this decision not to send you back, you know, and end this. So everybody sat down, and it's like, well, this is weird being in a maximum security prison, because before that, Ardith had been all evening, she'd been saying, see the girl on the end down there? Yeah. Well, she's here because she was cutting people up in little pieces and putting them in the dumpster up in San Francisco. See the one over there? You know, she's telling me about all their crimes, and some of them are sitting right behind you and stuff. And then they announced the blackout. And so we're sitting there, and sure enough, the lights went out, and it was dark for a minute. And the lady, Pam, that leads the program, she started singing, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." And little by little, everybody started chiming in. So it's just this whole room of people singing "This Little Light of Mine." And that ended, and then she started like America the Beautiful or some patriotic song, and that ended. And when that ended, the lights came back on. And I went driving home that night.
And tensions eased a little bit, I'm sure, because that could be unnerving.
She'd been roommates with one of the Manson girls, so she knew Susan Atkins. I don't know how well you know the Manson story.
Well enough. It's very famous. So she had been in there with...
Three of the Manson girls were in
wow.
there. And Susan...
Did she have direct contact with them?
Susan Atkins was her roommate, her cellmate for a short time. So she introduced me to him and everything. And I got to know Susan Atkins, and I got to know her actually pretty well. It was pretty interesting to know her because she committed horrific crimes. I mean, like, it doesn't get any worse than the crimes that the Mansons did to those people.
Briefly, what did she do? What was her role?
She cut an unborn baby out of...
That was her,
yeah.
Susan Atkins? Mm-hmm. Did she ever mention why, how she was led to
They
that?
were drugged up under the influence of Charles Manson, and she died of brain cancer a few years ago. But before she did, she started reciting to her husband notes to write her story, because there is a lot of crazy teenagers who look up to people like Charles Manson just because, for all the wrong reasons. And she wanted it to be very known. He was he didn't have any superpower. He was a very sick man who took all our belongings from us, and he held all the money and the food and the drugs, and got us addicted to drugs, and we did whatever we had to do for that. And
it's easy to mislead broken people.
Yeah. She was married a couple times. She married some wealthy old Texas guy a while back, and that prison started allowing conjugal visits. And she somehow snuck a knife into the conjugal visit, and after she pulled this knife on him at a conjugal visit, they took away conjugal visits after that. But then later, somebody, they get a lot of pen pals. People who committed crimes, they get pen pals.
Sure.
And one of them in particular that started writing to her started coming to visit her, and he was from a wealthy Orange County family, and he became a lawyer just so that he could come not just on visitation days but other days. And every single time I was there, he was already there when I arrived, and he was there long after I left. I'm saying that he was very devoted to her. And a lot of the people in prison let themselves go. They eat crappy food and start gaining weight and don't take care of themselves. But she stayed very fit, and she got a couple degrees while she was in there. She had a ministry that, I felt like her ministry, puts most of us to shame. So she did horrific things, but she really turned her life around. One of many books that was written about her is called Child of Satan, Child of God, because she was a devil worshiper at one time, and then she turned her life around and had a pretty powerful ministry for being in prison. And then Patricia Van Winkle and Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel, both of them were two other girls that I saw in there all the time. I didn't really get to know them like I got to know her. And then there's another lady that there's been a couple movies made on TV called A Woman Scorned. And she married, her husband became a doctor or lawyer, and after he started doing real good, after she worked to support him through school and everything, and when he finally started doing good, he started dating his young secretary and wanted a divorce, and she just went off the deep end, and she drove over one night and just shot them both up in bed.
Gosh.
And they made a couple movies about her, and she was in there.
Real quick on Susan Atkins, while I can ask the questions, did she ever give a reason for wanting to cut the baby out?
They did whatever Charlie told them to.
He was just directing them to do these things he thought were...
He wasn't even there at the crime.
Yeah.
He just gave them all their instructions. And
so they just pointed back to him when they were caught. How'd they get caught?
Oh gosh, their movie's fascinating. Their books and their movie. I mean,
Okay.
there's a lot to that. They committed other crimes, other murders
Okay,
besides
and
him too.
they were getting
A few days later, they went and
sloppy.
killed this other family. That was just a random killing. The first one that we're talking about, that was because Charlie was a musician, you know, and he wanted to get his music published or heard or acknowledged, and he went because he thought Doris Day's son lived there, and he tried to talk to that son about producing some of his music, and that guy kind of rejected him or blew him off. So that was why he targeted that house, but that guy didn't even live there anymore. It was another actress and her friends were there. And
gosh.
yeah. With Ardith, one time she couldn't wait for me to get there and sit down. I've got a big favor to ask you. And I thought, oh no, she's going to ask me for money and I'm not supposed to do that and everything. The favor was that would I go and pick up her parents and bring them to visit her, because by that time she hadn't seen them for a couple years. Her mother, I would describe her to look like Betty Davis, you know, kind of snarly and sinister.
Salty.
Yes. She was so happy that her parents were coming. She had a little makeup on, which she didn't always do, but this was like a huge thing, you know. And when I used to go visit her, she was a smoker. She knew her mom was a big smoker too. So on the other days, she would always borrow cigarettes. Well, usually you borrow and then you pay back another time. She never paid back, so she was really happy that today her mom's coming and now she can pay back some of the girls that she's borrowed from all this time, you know. So anyway, when we got in there, oh my gosh, she was just on cloud nine, and the four of us sat down at this table and we started talking, and she just wanted to hold her mom's hand the whole time. She hadn't seen her for years, and every time she'd take her mom's hand, her mom would just, you know, as the first chance, her mom would withdraw it, you know, like no, don't touch me, you know. And then after a while, her mom was sitting there smoking her cigarettes, and after a while, Ardith said, Mom, can I have a cigarette? And the mom pulls him closer to her and goes, no, I don't think you need them. And she didn't. And Ardith, she's a grown woman.
Yeah.
She looked like a whipped puppy. There's the look on her face, like she couldn't believe that her mom was denying. Her mom had a full pack of cigarettes. Her mom was
very resentful,
her mom said no.
maybe.
And that's you can just tell that's the kind of mind games that her mom just played, those emotional games. Like,
sure.
No, I don't think you need any. That's how she was. And then they had a photographer there that would take Polaroid pictures, you know. So we were going to take our picture, the four of us. And again, this picture's going to go over Ardith's bed in her cell. It's all she has, you know, every day is to hold on to this picture. So we go to get in this picture, and Ardith just wanted to like wrap her arms around her mom and just, you know, be hugging her. I have the picture still. Her mom put her arms around me, and she just snubbed Ardith. No, it was very sad. Very sad.
Yeah. Did she ever get cigarettes?
No, I don't think her mom ever did. Ardith had several suicide attempts, and I don't feel like they were really meant that she didn't really want to, but if you had a suicide attempt, you got sent over to Patton State Mental Hospital, and it's a little bit better situation over there. I think the food's better over there. There's men there, and Ardith was very man crazy. So instead of just being in an all women's prison, she was got to visit with men over there and stuff. So she did that several times, but she always said that she would never kill herself as long as her parents were alive. But after first her mom passed away, and then a couple years later her dad passed away, and then she really did commit suicide. Her job at that time was laundry, so she had some laundry bags that had long string on them or something, and she was able to hang herself.
Wow.
And they were going to have a little memorial service for her, and this was not the norm at all, but they said because I'd come to visit her for so long and everything, they allowed me to go back, not just to the visitation room, but back into the mental health ward, basically. And we went in this room, and it looked like a scene from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because those women, you know, most of them, their hair's all like this and everything, you know. They're in slippers. Oh, I am too. But they're in slippers and, you know, disheveled, and their hair's all messed up and everything. But they had a little service for her, and the different girls shared stories about her. The lady who was in charge of that unit said, you know, she said, I was trying to think what kind of song we would play at Ardith's service, you know, and one of the girls said she loved, oh my gosh, Bob Seger, Night Moves, and the lady said, oh, I don't think that's quite the right song to play at her memorial service. And she said, when I went to leave that day, I went out and got in my car and I started up the engine, and what came on the radio?
Really?
Bob Seger, Night Moves. So she said, I think that was Ardith saying that that's the song we need to play. So those big fans are going, and they had this old scratchy radio that wasn't clear, and they turned on Bob Seger, Night Moves, and there I am sitting in this room with one regular lady, but the rest were all inmates with mental problems, and we're sitting there listening to Night Moves. Yeah.
Incredible story. I mean, boy, I mean, it leaves you speechless. You know what really got me was with her mom withholding some cigarettes from her.
Yeah.
And just continuing to be a resentful, psychologically abusive person. And you know, in all the research I've done, it's what I found. It's a slow burn that happens to people. It's nothing that's illegal, and most people agree with it. Where you just have to teach the kid they can't just have anything they want.
Yeah.
And really, the thing you want to teach your kids is you can have anything you want if you go about it the right way. And so, but parents, you know, and then of course the mother must have been a victim of that same.
She'd been sexually abused also, and Ardith had one sister, and she did have a younger brother. And when I went to that parent's house several times, actually, because I ended up taking them a couple times. Their house, if this was their living room, they had a pool in the back, just 3 feet out. You know, it was like you barely stepped out the door and there was a pool, and her little brother had drowned in that pool. The mom stepped away. The mom went around to the side of the house for just a minute, thinking that little boy was okay. She came back, and there he was drowned.
Already drowned.
So they still lived in that house. A lot of people would have moved out of that house.
Haunted.
But that was like a grave that when they sat there for years and years later, there was that watery grave that their son had drowned in. That was haunting, I thought.
Yeah. You know, I call it familial brokenness disorder, where it's just passed down generation to generation, this brokenness mentality.
So Ardith had a sister, but when that second parent died, that sister was the only one out there to handle the parents' financial affairs. So they had a crummy little house, but in California it was a mile from the beach, so this crummy little house was worth $500,000 even so. And so Ardith was entitled to half of all that. And Ardith didn't ever really, she was in for 25 to life, and if she was leading a healthy life, she would have had the chance to go before a parole board and get out. But she was in the mental health ward. That you can't sit in the mental health ward and have suicide attempts and everything, and then they're going to release you back into society. But when she found out about that money, it gave her hope that if she were to get out, she would have been in her 60s, and that she would have had money. She wouldn't have been destitute or anything. So that gave her hope. The sister was going through a bad marriage herself, and the brother-in-law, the sister's husband, talked his wife. They were behind in their house payment, and said, let's use some of Ardith's money to bring our house current, and then when we sell the house, we'll reimburse Ardith's money because she can't get to it. Ardith couldn't get a hold of that money until she gets out of prison. So the wife went along with that and did that. And here he was seeing another woman. They sold the house and he did not pay back Ardith's money. He bought a motorhome with Ardith's money and took off with another woman. So she was facing a lot of legal problems and everything. But Ardith, when she wrote a letter to Ardith and said, Bob, or whatever his name was, spent your money. And this is torture. Ardith can't make phone calls or anything. First she hears she's got money waiting for her. Now Bob spent the money. I don't know where he's at. I don't know if we're going to get it back or whatever. And I noticed Ardith's letters at that time. I looked at her handwriting, all her letters all along, and then during that time it was really making her really
crazy,
off the deep end. And that whole scenario with the sister spending the money and all that was what set her over the edge, and she hung herself. Ardith didn't want to talk a lot about religion. She just acted like, I know, I'm okay, I don't need to talk about it or anything. And I'm not the kind to push religion on anybody, so we didn't. But towards the end, she started talking about it more, and towards the end, she shared a long story that it was the first time she felt like she talked with God, and she felt like he'd forgiven her for her crimes and everything. And then like within the week later is when I got the phone call that she'd hung herself.
Gosh. Boy, when it rains, it pours. There's a scripture in the Bible that says those who have will have more, and those who have not will have more of having not. And she just got caught in that. One thing you'll get a kick out of, because Barry loved Ardith. Okay.
He loved her just from all that I shared with him, from her letters, and then from getting to visit her. And she loved Barry, and he loved her a lot. And so when this was going on with his sister, he was so upset with his sister, and ultimately she committed suicide and everything over it. But I had got to know that sister. I had some conversations with her, and on one conversation she said, I just sold my house, I'm moving to Lake Elsinore. And I said, wait a minute, that's where I live, So we met for coffee. I didn't trust her sister. Like immediately I bonded with Ardith, and I just, felt like if Ardith would have got released, she would have been over for dinner the next day. But her sister was a little different, to warm up to. But I met her sister for coffee before, and I ended up inviting her to church, and she came to our church. Her son actually got baptized there. But Barry kind of told her one day, gave her a piece of his mind about what she did to
Barry was good about that.
She did. And then I'm sure it was at the end of a service, and we left. And then we found out later, like after everybody had cleared out of the church, one of the last people to leave who was on staff, Jana Busby, when she drove out, she saw some strange lady in the parking lot crying, and she pulled over to say, are you okay? And she said, this mean man, Barry Taylor, made me cry.
Yeah, I bet.
If when an inmate dies, if a family member doesn't take responsibility for their body, it's on the state to do something with them. So they were trying to figure out, is anybody coming forward and everything. And one of my close friends, she inherited 5 cemetery plots at our local cemetery, and she was going to offer one so that we could place Ardith there. But at the very last moment, a cousin from up there in Washington, she decided to send the money down they cremated Ardith, and they sent her remains up to Washington, and that cousin placed her in the same cemetery with the grandfather that had abused her.
Well, maybe on the other side, Ardith was going to get her say.
Yeah.
Odd.
But the only other thing about Ardith that we'll never really know is that Ardith felt like that those mafia guys, She felt like they had implanted a device in her brain that made her do that.
Wow.
I don't know if that was a ploy that she tried to present to get out of this or whatever. It sounds so far-fetched, but
Maybe
she
they
did believe that.
Maybe they told her they did that.
Yeah.
And, you know, when people go to those extremes, their thinking has to be really wonky, to say the least. It has to be out in left field at times. A lot of paranoia. You have to feel very scared in order to behave like that.
Yes.